Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Hoy tenemos un tema de enorme importancia que se va a tratar acá y que se ha tratado ya en reuniones del Comité de Asuntos Asiáticos. Hemos tenido a la embajadora de Filipinas y al embajador de la República Popular China hablando sobre la cuestión del mar del sur de la China. Y hoy justamente vamos a tener a un académico, un destacado académico de la República de Corea, que nos va a hablar desde una posición neutral, digamos, es decir, o más neutral que la embajadora de Filipinas o el embajador chino. La disertación es sobre cuestiones de jurisdicción en el mar del sur de China y noreste de Asia, y nuestro disertante de hoy, que lo va a hacer en inglés, es el profesor Sangmin Shim. El doctor Sangmin Shim es abogado por la Universidad de Seúl y doctor en Derecho por la Universidad de Stanford. Posee una amplia trayectoria como investigador en la Academia Diplomática de Corea y en el Instituto de Derecho Ambiental de Washington, D.C. y como profesor de Derecho Internacional Público en Ewha Women's University en Sookmyung Women's University y en la Escuela de Derecho de Stanford. Ha publicado varios artículos en revistas especializadas y ha brindado conferencias en Estados Unidos, Canadá y el Reino Unido. Es miembro de la American Society of International Law, de la Korean Society of International Law y de la Seoul International Law Academy. Así que, professor, we welcome you very heartily to our CARI. As you know, we are the Committee of Asian Affairs. It's integrated by academicians, by government officials, and by businessmen. Every month we invite one distinguished diplomat or academician to address us. Recently we had a very interesting speech by an Argentine journalist who visited North Korea. And it was an extremely interesting talk because she stayed there for quite some time and gave us her impressions on this northern neighbor, this restful northern neighbor of yours. So today we have you, and we are very happy to have you here, and we hope that after your talk there will be many questions. If you accept them, I am sure our participants will be very keen to ask you questions.
I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Okay, so the floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you very much for all of you that joined us at my presentation on the arbitration award on South China Sea issues. I'm sorry that I cannot speak any Spanish, but I'll try to make my presentation as understandable as possible, even for non-legal scholars, like for most of you who are here. And first of all, let me just say that I'm truly honored and privileged to be here as a presenter for some of the issues that you might be interested in. And today, well, slightly unlike the title suggests, let me focus on some of the merits that the arbitration award on the South China Sea issues presented. And also, let me also focus on some of the implications that this award will have toward the regional security in Northeast Asia, and also some of the territorial dispute issues in some of the surrounding some islands within this North Asian region. So let me just give you a brief outline of how this arbitration came into existence. And I just got heard from the person here that the people from the Philippines and people from China already gave you some background information on their part on this arbitration award. So let me briefly just wrap up some of the details of how it came about, how this arbitration award came about. The Chinese government started out asserting certain historical rights around the South China Sea. They drew theoretical line named 9 dash lines. I'm confident that most of you at least have had a chance to have heard about it. But it's actually the 99 dash line draws theoretical line covering almost 90% of the South China Sea, and the Chinese government claims that those 90% of the South China Sea is actually the territorial sea under the sovereignty of the Chinese government, and the neighboring nations, including the Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan, and some other Asian nations, have strongly opposed to the Chinese claims. And the Philippines was the most vocal of all those protesting nations, and they took the chance to file a claim against the Chinese arguments to the compulsory dispute settlement mechanism under the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention. And that started in 2013, and in its responses, the Chinese government claimed and argued that all the sovereignty issues cannot be tried upon under the United Nations Law of the Sea regime. And that is actually true, because the Law of the Sea Convention only deals with the disputes, not covering the sovereignty issues between nations. But then the government of the Philippines was wise enough to write down their suppositions, circumventing any of these sovereignty claims. They only asked the arbitration courts to decide whether there are certain maritime features, such as islands, small islands, and those which wouldn't be classified as a territorial alienation, so that some of the areas, some of the waters, some of the surrounding waters near the Philippines, the nation of Philippines, would be totally under the control of the Philippines, so that anything that China is doing in their surrounding waters would be in violation of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Oh, by the way, if you think that you have something that is not clear enough, please feel free to raise your hand so that I can answer your questions. I'm pretty ready to answer any questions during the presentation. But anyway, in 2013, the Philippines have filed the lawsuit against China on the issue of the South China Sea territory issues, and China responded that the arbitration tribunal wouldn't have any jurisdiction on this issue. But in 2015, the arbitration tribunal decided that it had jurisdiction on these issues because the Philippines' suppositions were not touching on any of the sovereignty issues, at least in its literal meaning. So the arbitration tribunal just went on to decide on the merits of the cases, and that award was made in July 12th of this year. Let me just give you the major findings of those the arbitration award. The first thing is that they said that as the Philippines claimed, there is no. I'm sorry. Let me start out with by the decision on the 9 dash lines, because the Chinese had strongly argued that they had legitimate claims on the South China Sea because they had some historical rights on the South China Sea. They cited some historical evidence dating back to early 16th centuries that some of the Chinese generals had strong control over those surrounding waters. But the arbitration tribunal said that whatever the Chinese claims may have been they are successfully substituted when the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea came into force, and China acceded to it in 1996. So after the argument was that after 1996, the Chinese claim would have lost their legitimacy because they have signed on to a new regime, and the rules on the new regime would regulate the Chinese activities in that region. So that was the first finding that the arbitration award gave to the South China Sea issue. And the second thing was that whether there are some of the territories that China claims as their own that are actually not territories. It may sound very confusing and very awkward. So let me give you some background information on the regime of island under the Law of the Sea Convention. It's stipulated under Article 121 that islands are the naturally formed area of land that are surrounded by waters, and also that are always above the high tide. So to be classified as an island, which are subject to the territorial claims, it has to be naturally formed, meaning that any kind of a human hands trying to just build upon those maritime features wouldn't really count as the real island. And the second thing is that the Article 121, paragraph 3 also says that rocks that cannot sustain human habitation or the economic life of their own will not have continental shelf or the exclusive economic zone. What this means is that even if you have something in the open sea, if it doesn't have any population living in it, or if it cannot sustain economic activities that is not totally dependent upon the fisheries or dependent on outside resources, or if it's only dependent on the mining activities, it cannot be classified as the island, so that it cannot claim any territory. It cannot claim any exclusive economic zones or continental shelf. And this is the argument that the arbitration tribunal agreed with, because many of the Chinese claims on some of the maritime features on this South China Sea was either strengthened by human activities like artificial reclamation or the installation of some of the infrastructure on those maritime features. So that removed the possibility that these maritime features would be classified as the islands, because for certain maritime features to be classified as islands, it has to be naturally formed. And that was one thing, and also the arbitration court found that many of those maritime features under Chinese claims were not good enough to maintain economic lives of their own, or that they were only dependent on outside resources or mining activities. So that also removed the possibility that these maritime features would be classified as island under Chinese claims, that those areas suddenly became totally an open sea, or the surrounding waters within the regime of the exclusive economic zones under the Philippines. What this means is that whatever the Chinese did in those areas was actually the violation of their obligations not to interfere with other countries' legitimate activities within their own maritime zones. So the arbitration tribunal went on to say that the Chinese government was in violation of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea by interfering with the Philippines' activities, trying to make use of their resources within their exclusive economic zones. And that court also found that there are reclamation efforts and also the installation of artificial infrastructure within that region constituted another violation of the UN law of the convention, which is the duty to protect the marine environment within that region. So the arbitration court decided that China was violating many of the provisions under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and that the court also suggested that to be able to solve this issue permanently, the contending parties, which are the Philippines and also China, should start bilateral negotiations as soon as possible, so that they will arrive at an agreeable solution by peaceful means. So these are the wrap up of what the arbitration tribunal said in its findings. Does anyone have any questions so far? Then I'll just continue to see what are the following events after this arbitration award. Usually, when a court makes a case and decides upon it, the parties will likely follow the rulings and try to comply with the rulings. But that is not what the Chinese government has chosen to do. Rather, Chinese government started to act more aggressively by trying to set up more artificial infrastructure in some of the other islands and some of the other maritime features in this region. So that worried the United States and also worried the Philippine government and also the government of Indonesia. So the tension is really high still in this region, and there is no way in sight of solving this issue in any peaceful means. But let's just leave it at that and try to see whether the arbitration award has some implications for other territorial dispute issues in Northeast Asia, because we have still unsolved territorial dispute issues among many of the nations. Let me start with the territorial dispute that my country, Korea, has with Japan, which is called Dokdo in Korean or Takeshima in Japanese, territorial dispute. Two nations have been claiming their sovereignty on these two uninhabited maritime features for a long time. And if we, as I briefly outlined before, if we take the arbitration award's findings as authoritative and as a precedent for the other possible legal proceedings, chances are that the Dokdo or Takeshima will be classified as not as an island, but as a rock, which wouldn't have any maritime zones by itself. So the economic value that these islands will have will be significantly decreased, so that there's not going to be much merit between these these governments to still argue over the sovereignty issues in those uninhabited areas. But what is actually more at stake is the nationalist sentiment between these two nations. They are not much of the population in either nations are not interested in just making use of economic value that these uninhabited islands can have for each country. They are still arguing for their nationalistic pride in having those islands under each of those nations' control. So if we say that there are some Koreans that tend to believe that these uninhabited islands should be called Takeshima, he would rather pack his belongings. He would rather pack his belongings and leave the country, because once his voice was heard by the people surrounding him, those people will start persecuting him by any possible means. And it will be the same with the Japanese people, although the intensity of the nationalistic voices are slightly less in Japan's case. Anyway, if we take the arbitration awards findings here and try to apply that to the Dokdo Island case, chances are that we will have less reasons, fewer reasons to argue over those islands because of the lessened economic value surrounding those islands. But it will be a little bit of a challenge if we just get out and just speak out what is true under the United Nations Convention, Law of the Sea Conventions, because nationalistic sentiment issues always prevails over some of the other legitimate concerns. So that is my cautious conclusion surrounding the Dokdo or Takeshima Island issues. And we also have two other interesting territorial dispute issues. So the first one is the territorial dispute between Japan and China, which are over Senkaku-reto in Japanese terms, or Diaoyu Dai in Chinese terms. These are a group of the maritime features that are mostly uninhabited, but they have some strategic value because if they are able to have some claim, if they are able to claim some of the maritime zones like exclusive economic zones or continental shelf, it will vastly expand the claiming government's economic benefit that can come out of those zones. And for now, Japan has effective control over those islands, but Chinese are strongly protesting the Japanese government's claim that they are the legitimate owners of those maritime features. And just like the Dokdo Island issue, if we apply the same logic to these Senkaku-reto or the Diaoyu Dai island issues, chances are that these islands, these maritime features will lose their status as an island, and then they will be reduced to some of the rocks. They won't have any exclusive economic zones or continental shelf. So then, as with the Dokdo Island issue, it will significantly lessen the value of just continuing to control those maritime features. But with the Dokdo Island issues, there's still nationalistic sentiment issues prevails surrounding these islands. So I'm not sure if any kind of easy solutions could come out of it, even if you apply the findings of the arbitration award as kind of a precedent. And the third and the last one is the very interesting case surrounding certain maritime features under the Japanese control, which is called Okinotorishima. These are actually not even an island, not even rock. These are the coral reefs or atoll in the scientific terms that are sometimes submerged in below the high tides of the seawater. So technically they are called low tide feature, meaning that they won't be able to claim any maritime zones like exclusive economic zones or this or continental shelf, or even they won't be able to have 12-mile territorial waters because they are not classified as either cannot classify as either an island or a rock. They will only have a certain value as to just to set up some scientific infrastructure or some lighthouses to help the passing vessels navigate safely. So if you apply that to these Okinotorishima, chances are that this island and this maritime feature will lose its economic value totally. But what the Japanese government is doing around this atoll is that they set up artificial installations above those maritime feature, and also it did make serious efforts to reclaim these tolls so that it would have certain appearance of being an island. They just even set up certain installations so that even some of the helicopters can land on some of those areas. But if we apply the arbitration award's findings on these maritime feature, there is not much to claim around this maritime feature. So to just sum up what I have suggested so far is that it's just that arbitration award have some implications for reducing the economic values of some of the disputed territorial areas in Northeast Asia. Although I have to be careful in saying this because, as I mentioned before, the nationalistic sentiment always prevails over any other legitimate concerns or claims on these territorial issues. So let me just go back to let me just go back and say that although as a conclusion, that the arbitration award on the South China Sea issue was a great example of just possibly solving the territorial disputes. Nationalist sentiment will always prevail, may prevail over any legitimate concerns on those disputed territorial issues, so that the disputes may just continue to sizzle even after this arbitration award. So these are my presentations, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have on this topic. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor, on a very interesting subject and a very worrying subject, taking into account that through the South China Sea, much of the trade of the world passes by, and any conflict in the region can create big problems for many nations, not only the North and South Asian countries, but also for the rest of the world. I think it's one of the conflicts that we are pending on us, and we hope that sense prevails over nationalistic sentiments, but we know well that that's not normally the case. In general, nationalistic sentiments prevail, and unfortunately this generates big problems. So, well, now we open the floor to any questions. I'm sure that your presentation will raise many questions from the participants. Ambassador David.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor, for your very elucidating, I don't think it's necessary, presentation that on such an important matter. My question would be, were there other states that participated as third interested parties in the proceedings of the Permanent Court of Arbitration? Because, of course, this, as you rightly said, this is a decision that affects other countries in the region. And I wonder if they did participate as interested parties during the proceedings.
Well, as far as I remember, there was another country, which is Vietnam, which was interested in participating in this proceeding as the third party, but they eventually decided not to. But I'm sure that after this ruling is out, those neighboring nations, especially Vietnam and Indonesia, might be interested in filing similar proceedings under the law of the sea, compulsory dispute settlement mechanism. Although I think I forgot to say when I was explaining the background of this arbitration that China did declare that it wouldn't, that country wouldn't be subject to the compulsory jurisdiction of the law of the sea, the dispute settlement mechanism, because they declared that many of the territorial waters claims and exclusive economic zone disputes, and also the disputes over the continental shelf wouldn't be something that China will be willing to just appear as court to argue for. And although the arbitration court said that because of the way the Philippines claims have been written down as not touching on any of those issues, that China decided not to be subject to under the compulsory jurisdiction. The arbitration court said that they have jurisdictions on the pending issues at that case. Even though China strongly suggested that the way the Philippines wrote down their proposition was actually disguised for claiming sovereignty on some of the sovereign waters. But that's what it is, and now the ball is on the Chinese court to respond. And as I said before, the Chinese government decided to act more aggressively rather than deciding to comply with the rulings of the arbitration.
May I ask that question?
Yes.
Thank you very much. May I ask what is your personal opinion on the decision of the court to declare itself competent on this matter? Is it in line with international law? How do you see it?
Well, to be honest, I have some reservations on the way that the court decided that they had jurisdictions on these cases. Because if we allow the disputing parties to just come up with the creative ways to circumventing some of the mechanisms that countries can successfully use to just protect themselves against the conflicting claims, then it would basically make useless the declaration procedures that countries can use to just protect themselves against other the conflicting claims. So I'm just worried about whether this would be the precedent for some for future proceedings. Partly because the Korean government also declared almost along the same line on on the application of the compulsory jurisdiction on some of the territorial issues within the Korean country, especially Dokdo Island.
Gracias. Sí.
Can you perhaps elaborate a little bit on what factors are influencing perhaps what one could interpret to be a more aggressive Chinese policy concerning its invocations of the maritime area that is in dispute? And furthermore, to what extent the Asian nations which are affected one way or another by these Chinese claims could or would adopt a common strategy to countenance the Chinese, let's say, behavior or policy in the area. Now, thirdly, what would be the likelihood of a miscalculation on the part of one of these countries that could unleash a battle or an armed conflict that is sort of beyond everybody's perhaps calculation nowadays, but which could happen given the intransigence of the parties involved?
Well, to answer your questions, someone more qualified than me should just sit in this table to answer those, because I would say that the international political scientist would be better positioned to answer your questions. But let me try as hard as possible to answer your questions, because I've read some of the reports written by my colleagues on those specific issues. First thing is that you mentioned that the Chinese government's aggressive behavior as something that might be influenced by the U.S. Influenced by some other factors, especially the tactics to fight against the U.S. influence in the region. And I believe that there is some truth in it. And recently, the United States government announced their policy, which is called the repositioning, rebalancing to Asia, or rebalance it in Asia, so that the United States would start to increase their influence or increase their presence in the Southeast Asian region, and that will naturally entail the strong opposition from the Chinese government. And this is also related to your second comment or question, that maybe that those conflicting those conflicting positions between the two biggest powers on the world scene, which are China and the United States, might entail some of the unexpected consequences as small-scale armed conflict between some of the battleships between these two nations. I'm really hoping that that won't be happening anytime soon, but if one country doesn't back off against the other country's strong position, chances are that they will have some unintended consequences. I truly hope that these two governments will exercise their restraint and just go back to their senses, try not to escalate the situation any further than this. But as long as China has some strong ambitions to just claim the top position in the world scene, we might be witnessing some kind of small-scale skirmishes, one way or another, in the near future. I forgot your third question.
The coordination between the Asian countries vis-a-vis these negotiations with the Chinese.
That's true, yes. Well, the surrounding nations could possibly come up with the coordination tactics to protect themselves against the Chinese influence. But the reality is that Chinese are much wiser than just receiving just taking the receiving end of the stick, and they strongly influence one of those 8 ASEAN nations named Cambodia to strongly be in support of the Chinese position, even in the issues of surrounding South China Sea. So I don't know if the surrounding nations or the whole world community in general could be coming up with any coordination efforts, effective coordination efforts to guard against the Chinese influence in this region anytime soon. That's my personal assessment.
Gracias. Señora.
Thank you for your presentation. I have two questions mainly. When you discuss the pending territorial dispute, we have a common actor, which is Japan, in all three of them. So, did you find any legal arguments that are similar to the Chinese? I know that the Chinese chose not to participate in the procedure before the Permanent Court of Arbitration, but they did circulate it on paper to the auditors. And my second question is, if we cannot solve as international community by peaceful means these disputes, mainly by arbitration, applying UNCLOS, how do you envision that we can solve them in the future?
Well, let me answer your first question first, because it's slightly easier to answer than to answer the second one. They say that Japanese claims on these three disputed territories have some similarities with some Chinese claims, especially the third one, because the Okinawa Torishima is actually the reclamation effort intended to expand the maritime presence by the Japanese authorities. But as I mentioned before, if we apply the same logic that we can draw from the arbitration award, chances are that these Okinawa Torishima wouldn't be classified as any of those maritime features that will have legitimate claims to the maritime territories, maritime waters. So I'll say that this is something that the Japanese government is greatly concerned about, and they are monitoring the repercussions of this arbitration award, because they are afraid that the same logic would apply to this specific maritime future that will encroach upon the legitimacy of the Japanese claims. That is something I can say about the Japanese positions, which have some similarity to the Chinese claims. And I would also add that there is some conflicts between the Japanese claims in the first case, which are Tokto and Takeshima Islands, and the Japanese claims on the second case, which are the Senkaku Reito or Daiyo Dai Islands. Because the Japanese government's claims on the first case is that those islands in question were actually uninhabited island that was subject to be successfully claimed by any nation that first just made some legal action on it. And the Japanese government's position was that because those islands were terra nullius, meaning that no man's land, one of those local governments named Shimane Prefecture made their ordinances incorporating those uninhabited islands under those prefectural land. And then when you turn to the second case, which are the Senkaku Reito, the Japanese government's claim was that those contested islands belong to some other countries. May have belonged to some other countries, but they started applying effective control over it, that they can successfully substituted whatever was the true ownership of those islands. And there were some intervening events surrounding these islands, which are the Japanese defeat in the World War II. And after the defeat of Japan in World War II, the United States took over the control of those contested islands. But since 1972, those islands were returned to Japan, and Japan claimed that with the return of the administrational power on those islands, the effective control went back to Japan, so that they continued to have applied the effective control of those islands. So they were saying that those islands have never lost any ownership over the course of time. Or the Chinese government said that because the Japanese government lost the war, and the authority over those islands were taken over by the United States. Those islands suddenly became terra nullius, no man's land, and the Chinese original claims were resurrected, so that the Chinese had some historical claims that could be based upon. They could be the basis of the Chinese current claims over those islands. So there are certain conflicts or discrepancies on Japanese claims on the first case and the Japanese claims on the second cases. But these are what they are, and we'll see how it goes over time. And the second one. I don't know how I could answer that. But let's just say that what the arbitration award envisioned was that these two disputing parties would start out with a new round of negotiations to put this one to mutually agreeable solutions. But that is not what is happening now. So we'll see. And then the surrounding nations also slightly favor the peaceful solutions to these issues. But you may also know that the recently elected Filipino president, President Duerta, is someone very very similar to Donald Trump, who is running for the US president, who is unpredictable, who is also very impulsive. So we'll see we'll see if the negotiation will start at all between the Chinese government and the Filipino government. And if so, chances are that it won't be starting anytime soon. That's all I can say as an answer to your second question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Ambassador Shuf.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. Let me share, and I want to hear your opinion, but this is an issue that some time ago it was like very late in the letter. But I have the impression that lately it has become very hot. You know, you have some presence of military movements, and it's not anymore a question of a legal issue, because when the legal decision came out, the Chinese said it wasn't binding. But you know, very recently, some other countries have been involved in comments, like United States. The president of United States a few weeks ago in Laos, in the meeting of ASEAN, he said that this decision is binding. So I want to see what you can say about it.
Well, technically, what the current president of the United States said is right, because under the law of the Sea Convention, the United Nations law of the Sea Convention, whatever comes out of the arbitration process, whatever comes out of the compulsory dispute settlement mechanism is final and binding among the parties. That is what Article 287 says about the effects of the arbitration, the compulsory dispute settlement mechanism outcome has. But having that aside, let us focus on some of the practical effects that this one will have in settling the disputes over the South China Sea features. It's one thing that legally there is one provision that says that this one is fine. It's another thing that truly these parties will comply with the findings of the arbitration award. And as I mentioned before, and as you are fully aware, Chinese government declared at the first beginning of the legal proceedings that China didn't accept the arbitration's tribunal's jurisdiction, and also that it wouldn't comply, or it wouldn't acknowledge whatever outcome that may have come out of the legal proceedings, and that is what Chinese government is currently doing. Let me say that the arbitration tribunal tried to settle this dispute, and a new dispute arises over the arbitration award between China and some other nations, including the Philippines. So the dispute is still going on, although it has some different features and different colors as a result in the aftermath of this arbitration. So let's just say that the dispute is still unresolved, and that the dispute will be more complicated if more nations try to get involved, making it much more difficult to reach a solution that will be pleasing to every interested nation in this region. Would that be an answer to your question?
We are just sharing
that's
views.
That's my personal view.
Thank you very much.
Well, two more questions and we close. Professor Ramoneda.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I will just make it short regarding your presentation and the other question and answers. Regarding what has been said, I want to, if you can share with us your opinion. What do you think if it is a bilateral solution or a multilateral solution, we come up with an answer to the Southeast Asian part, to the China, Southeast Asia, Japan. The multilateral solution or a bilateral solution?
This is the really tough question to answer. And I would be lying if I said that I knew the answer to your question. But let's just say that unilateral solution usually involves the use of force, threat or use of force, which are totally prohibited under the Charter of the United Nations. Although, I'm just repeating what I have said moments ago, that being legal is something different than being effective. So you can be illegal but more effective.
Thank you, Professor Shim. My question is regarding the previous one, where it might be possible to consider the possibility of a future solution consisting on a hegemonic consensus within the ASEAN organization, despite the recent cases of, as you mentioned, Philippines or perhaps Cambodia regarding China, because for what I think that the international law cannot assess is the political or geopolitical aftermath of Chinese negligence to acknowledge that it could be the best scenario to, let's say, converge, or for the international community to converge behind the Asian interest in the Southeast China Sea?
Well, let me just say that there is only, the international law can do only so much in trying to solve international disputes. And if some of the political questions are involved, it'll just make the situation much more difficult to resolve. And international law by itself cannot do much to solve those politically charged issues, especially when it comes to making some countries in favor of taking one position against the world. But let's just be hopeful that sometime going down the road, some of the governments will just get back to their senses and try to be more compliant with the international legal order and try not to violate what is written down as the essentials of the international legal order. That could be China, although I don't put much hope on it anytime soon. But if China finds some other values in starting to cooperate with other nations in resolving the differences through the regional mechanisms like ASEAN, then China will be much better position to take its role as either the leading world power or the world co-power that will shape the agendas of the world political matters. And I'm just hopeful that China will find some values in giving up their small interest in exchange for taking the opportunity to lead up to the scene of the world at least as a co-leader in political matter. That's all I can say.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Sangmin Shim, on that last hopeful expectation. Let's hope that your idea takes root in China and in the region, because I think this is one of the more complex and dangerous situations we will be facing in the coming years. So thank you very much for your presentation. We are very pleased to have you today, and you know that our doors are always open for you or people from your academy to visit us. Thank you very much.